I'm here with Kwong, and I'm going to be asking some of the same questions, many of the same questions I actually asked Harry, because I think it'll be interesting to see where their experiences are the same and where they're not. And I guess the first place to start is, did you train formally as a screenwriter?
I did not. Just like
Yet again. Okay.
But I wasn't an actor. I desperately wanted to be a cinematographer. I went to UCLA Film School after studying medicine. That was what I originally was aimed towards by my family. And one summer, my medical grant ran out, and I ended up at UCLA Film School at a summer session, and I made a movie in about 10 weeks, and I was completely hooked. And then I saw the films of James Wong Howe, and I went, I'm going to be the next Asian cinematographer. There's only one writing class I ever took, and it was in the towards the end of film school, and it was being taught by Paul Schrader, who at the time had just finished Taxi Driver. And he was doing a guest stint at UCLA, and about 100 students showed up to be in this seminar for 12 people. And I remember we're packed in this little room, and it was filtering out into the halls, and he was stood up on a chair, and he kind of yelled. He said, I have to decide who the 12 are going to be, and what I want you to do is I want you to write your 3 most pressing problems down on a piece of paper. I'll give you 15 minutes to do that, and then turn it in, and then I'll post who's in the class. And so, knowing that it was Paul Schrader and that he had just written Taxi Driver, I didn't have very many personal problems at the time. I was too young. But I made some pretty weird and nasty things up, and I got into the class.
Wait a minute, like what? Give me an example. Can you remember, or you just...
I actually don't remember, but I remember sitting in the lighting beds of the sound stages and really racking my brains, and just I remember writing down some things, and I thought, this will really grab his attention. So it's always about marketing, right? Seth is still around. But the reason why I mention that, and I still use what he taught me, because he took the 12 into the class, shoved everyone out, closed the door, and then he took a piece of chalk, and then he stood up on a chair, and he wrote on the wall over the blackboard, because at that time we still used blackboards, he wrote on the wall, "Have no shame." And he said, this is the key to writing. And I think it's the key to whether you're making a family film or a drama or a romantic comedy, any kind of writing. Nobody is born a writer. I mean, there's some people who have some natural tendencies, but there's always this inherent shame that I'm not good enough to put my ideas forth that millions of people are going to absorb and transform their lives with, because as I said early on in the session, that the best films are about transformation, and they transform the audience. What he said was, what I want you to do is, I want you to take one of those problems and create a metaphor for it, and then flush your problem through that metaphor. Now the interesting thing about that is that, as I said, and I think maybe it might have been Harry, is finishing is really the difficulty. But if it's really your problem, and it really is pressing, you're going to get through that script. And I don't care what format you use, whether you card it out or outline it out, or just write with just the knowledge of maybe a couple of pages ahead of where you are, you're going to find a way to the end if you really want to get through your problem. Now, some people like to wallow in their problems and not solve it, but I tend to try and get through to the solution. So that has been my methodology on almost any script that I write, is that even if I'm doing an adaptation or I've been commissioned to write the script, I'll find something very personal to me about it, and then try and solve the issue. And as opposed to when I was 18 and taking that class and had no problems, now I have plenty of problems.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy.
Easy to apply.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the metaphors that are tricky.
Yeah, no,
sometimes.
and you really want to create a metaphor. It is no good to just baldly write about yourself. And in fact, those are usually the most boring films, unless they're a really good documentary. But you want to create some kind of arm's length metaphor so that you can really drop the shame of it and embed those problems in characters of your creation. Because if it's you, if you're seeing you, then it's like, that character shouldn't have that problem at all. But if it is something of your making, and it is of some kind of fiction, you can put that character through all sorts of turmoil.
Yeah. That's fantastic advice. I mean, have no shame. What it echoes something Harry was saying too about that the value in screenplays is an individual voice. So it's about whatever is unique about you, and often it's the thing you're ashamed of or
Yeah.
the thing that you keep hidden. And I mean, what I always tell writers, to me, the biggest problem with any scripts in any country that I encounter is that the writer isn't hard enough on their hero. That your job as a writer is to put your hero through hell. And what you're talking about is sort of coming at that same thing, but from a slightly different angle, which is solve the problem. But to do that, you need to go through all sorts of conflict. And the metaphors are about how big the obstacles get, I guess.
Well, especially in a family film, right? Every family has its dysfunction. Of course, not our families, but most families have some kind of dysfunction to it. And to really write about that in as shameless and as honest and authentic a way as possible is where you'll strike the universal chord. And that's why the best family films, there's something there, usually from multiple points of views about that particular dysfunction.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny because when you think of an old classic film like Swiss Family Robinson, where you have basically a bunch of really nice people all in one family, but ultimately they are dysfunctional. And what's interesting about the problem that this family has to solve is that the conflicts that that they had with each other before the shipwreck become exacerbated by the shipwreck, and the splinters and the problems that family might not have even ever realized they had suddenly are brought to the fore. And the film is, in the end, will they be rescued is the sort of textual question, but subtextually is, will this family resolve their issues? So the two brothers that are fighting, the parents that are fighting, and all of that. So interesting. I want to start right away with Nim's Island, and we can go back to some of your earlier work, but I think I'd love to know how you got involved with Nim's.
The producer, Paula Mazur, was someone I had known for a while, and she had read a number of my scripts. And at the time, I was writing mostly dark indie material. I kind of go back and forth between brighter studio stuff and then the darker independent stuff, just to maintain sanity. Because I will say that the unfortunate thing about studio films is that they do follow a certain formula. You're not going to kill off the kid at the end of the movie, more than likely, and usually if there's a romantic angle, they will get together. And if there isn't that satisfying, in mainstream, satisfying formula in a $50 million, $100 million, $200 million movie, you're not going to get the box office that justifies the making of the movie. So indies, for me, are where I can kill off the hero and
Right.
make it so that the lovers don't ever get together. And so Paula had read some stuff that I had written, and she was just running an idea by me, a number of ideas by me, and she had just optioned Nim's Island. She said, have you read Nim's Island? I said, I haven't even heard of it. And she said, just tell me what your thought is and what your take is on this. And so I read it and let her know, and she said, ooh, that sounds good. Would you take a meeting with me at Walden? And Walden Media had a deal with Fox at the time. And we went into the pitch. She let me do the pitch, and
So it was strictly a verbal pitch? They hadn't read a treatment or anything like that before?
no. But I will say this about Hollywood, not necessarily on the animation side. I would say more on the live action side, that you'll find, and I'll circle back around to this later, is that previously existing material is so helpful for the average Hollywood executive, because they can see it, touch it, feel it, right? So a Marvel comic book, a graphic novel, a television show from the 60s, this obscure book from Australia, it exists. And you can give them a fantastic original script, and it's like, oh, well, whatever. So they actually hadn't even read the book. They just were holding the book when I did the pitch, and they thought it was quite interesting. They really loved the pitch, and they went straight to the script. I didn't even have to write a treatment.
Wow.
And sometimes that happens with previously existing material, because the material is the treatment, so to speak. You're going to base it on Daredevil or on Spider-Man. Okay, I get it.
But in the case of Nim's Island, the book is much more small scale. It's much more about Nim. And then the movie became a big budget star vehicle with special effects and all that. When they commissioned the screenplay, what were they commissioning?
They were... Part of Walden's mission statement was really to promote movies that were based on literary material. They want young people to read books. And so that was their only aim. I don't think they really knew, or I don't think they expected to get the script that I handed in, which was, oh my gosh, this looks like about $100 million movie that is going to have to be, it's going to have to be opened by a 13 or 14-year-old girl. How are we going to do this? How can we justify this? The reason why the cost was so high was because, and it really wasn't in the book, was that I wrote a number of underwater scenes in it that aren't in the movie, and also a number of very big production set pieces that were based on the Alex Rover character, the novels that she was writing. I was visualizing what the novel would look like, and then and interposing that in a number of ways. I mean, for a screenplay, it was kind of a dream job, because there were so many different elements and things to cut to. There's the little girl on the tropical island. There's her father lost at sea. There's Alex Rover, who's in San Francisco. There's the books that she's writing and the characters that character adventures that she's envisioning in her novels. And then also Alex and Nim are imagining in their emails, visualizing, at least in the way that I wrote it, what each other looked like. Nim thinks Alex is a man, and Alex can't quite figure out Nim keeps on talking about Selkie and Freddie, and Freddie's a chicken, so she thinks Freddie is a chicken, and he's actually, of course, this chameleon, and Selkie is like, she thinks it's a cow, but it's actually a sea lion. So there's all these different kind of elements and fantasies that were going on, which to me as a writer it was a total gas to write. But when the studio saw it, they went, oh, holy smokes, this is really expensive. Okay, we got one. We're going to put this on the shelf until we find a kid that can carry a movie of this size, and you got to beef up Alex Rover. So that was the next major draft, was, actually beefing up the adult side of the movie, because I just didn't feel like I could carry it. And so I did. I beefed it up, and they were still worried about the girl character, the lead character, and then Abigail Breslin kind of appeared in what was the name of that movie?
Thank you, Little Miss
Yes,
Sunshine.
Little Miss Sunshine. So Little Miss Sunshine, thank goodness that came out. And then Sandra Bullock said, I want to make this movie. This is fantastic. And I was so happy, because that's exactly who I saw. In my mind when I was writing it, it was sort of this scatterbrain, but I knew it really needed a comedian. But Sandra Bullock said, I have to be in Los Angeles. So we can do this, and I'll do it, but we got to shoot around LA. And that upped the budget. And the production managers costed it out and said, this is more than we're going to spend. So they passed, believe it or not, on Sandra Bullock. And I think that, wow. To this day, they're kind of kicking themselves, because within a year or so, she won an Oscar, right? But then Jodie Foster stepped in. Now, Jodie is a great actress, but comedy wasn't necessarily her forte, but thank God she wanted to do it, because they said, okay, we'll make the movie, and we're going to save money, we're going to shoot at the Great Barrier Reef. I don't know why they thought, oh, we'll go all the way around the world, shoot there.
Cheap dollar.
Yeah. But, of course, when you have Jodie Foster in a movie, then everything else starts to increase in terms of how you want to surround a star like that with appropriate everything, effects and accommodations, the whole thing. And I think the move probably ended up costing as much as it would have with Sandra Bullock in Los Angeles.
Right. At the time that Jodie Foster was attached, how far along, how many drafts had you done? How many years had you been working on it?
I actually did it pretty fast, because I was working on another movie at the time, but I actually counted it last night. There were 30 drafts that were done, but I would say there are 5 major drafts where you could definitely see that there were structural changes there. So the way I number drafts is, if I do a major structural change, I'll go to a new number. I'll go from 1 A, B, C, D, D, E, F to 2 A, B, C, D, E, F, like that. So the last was like 4 or 5 were the final drafts, but there were A, B, C, D, E, Fs in them. Sometimes they're just dialogue changes, or you've thrown a scene out or whatever in the A, B, C, D drafts, but they're still different.
So how far along in that process were you when Jodie was
done.
Attached? You were done. Oh, okay.
I was done, and then this is part of the process of doing a Hollywood studio picture, and why I think I would love to be in Australia. If you, my first movie where the script got majorly rewritten in the shooting draft that I didn't do the rewrite on, and completely depressed me. Friend of mine said, "Hey, Joe, you're a Hollywood writer, or if you want to be a Hollywood writer, just grow up and deal with this. If you want nobody to touch your your work than be a poet. And I said, well, what about a novelist? He said, no, you still get edited as a novelist. And so I kind of learned from that. And so what happened after I finished my drafts, the studio really wanted to pump up the adult characters more, and then they hired 2 other writers. Those writers got paid so much more than me, and those drafts were, I think they wrote 2 or 3 drafts, and those were dumped. And then 2 more writers came on, and they were the final pair of writers and also directed the movie.
Right. And then I know, if this isn't too painful for you, what happened after that was, because the credit was disputed, it went to Writers Guild of America arbitration, right?
Well, every script is arbitrated to some level. I mean, it's scrutinized, I should say, by the Writers Guild. And so it was arbitrated. It wasn't painful for me. I didn't think that I was going to get the lead credit, even though I felt that, and at that point I hadn't seen the movie and I hadn't read the final shooting script, but I had made some major detours from the novel, and I thought, well, if they're anywhere, I can't imagine them canning some of those turns that I made, because it's just going to make for a better picture. And if the final writers were anywhere close to that, I'll probably at least get credit. But I ended up getting the lead credit after arbitration.
And tell me what you thought when you saw the film.
Well, one is always very happy to see finished work, especially as a screenwriter. You don't write to write screenplays. You write the screenplay to have a finished movie, and it's hard to get there. It's hard to have an idea, to finish a script, to get it financed, to get it through production, and then get distributed. It's a long and brutal haul. And so I was thrilled that the movie got made. I was surprised not to see it made quite in the way that I had envisioned it. But I'm pleased that the movie got made.
Good for you. Okay, I'm reading a lot
enough?
Between the lines. You don't have to be diplomatic here. You can be.
No, it's not the first movie studio movie that ever got made that I wrote the script for. I still haven't seen that movie.
Which movie was that?
Growing Pains.
You haven't seen it?
Bad Manners. No, I haven't seen it. I saw the shooting script. I mean, that was, and so I was on the road to being
Tell us about, let's go back and start from the development of that and the idea. And what year, this was in the 80s?
That was in the 80s. I'd taken the Schrader class, and I took a very, very personal issue of mine and created the metaphor and fleshed it through. And I wrote it incredibly fast. I've never written a script that fast before or since, because it was done on a bet. I wrote 10 pages a day, and I was done in 10 days. And then the next week, I had offers to buy the script.
Oh my God. Did you have an agent at the time?
No, that's how I met Joel Gottler. He said, because I got an offer from a bunch of producers who had made a couple of films, and he said, look, I don't want to be your friend, but I'm going to make you a lot of money. He said, I know where to sell this thing. And he sold it to Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Harry's boss.
Yes.
Amazing.
And I was so excited. I went, oh, wow, this is so fantastic. And so I went to the set, and the gaffer, who had been a gaffer on a film that I had shot before, said, Joe, what are you doing here? And I said, I wrote this script. I wrote this movie, and they're making this movie, and it was a studio film. And he went, oh, God, you wrote this piece of shit? And I went, what? And I looked over and I picked up the shooting script and I started reading through it and I was horrified. Now, I mean, you have to understand, I finished writing the script and I also printed it out and wrote a dedication to my mother and father and gave it to my parents.
Oh my God.
Right. So that when I saw what they were doing with it, and it actually ended up, Esquire used to have the Dubious Achievement Awards. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but basically it's like whatever shameful stuff is done in popular culture, they kind of highlight it at the end of the year. And this movie, my first script, got a Dubious Achievement Award because of a scene that I hadn't even written, where one of the kids was cutting off the clothes of a nun that was tied up, and
oh my God.
And, it's like, what? Where did that come from? But anyway, it was a great lesson that okay, just write it, move on, and write your passion scripts so that you can kind of absolve yourself and get some redemption. But it's a team sport. And if you can't take those lumps of being on the team, then you should move on. And when it works right, it's like watching the Golden State Warriors right now. When it works right, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. When everyone is on the same page and they honor the script, they honor the actors, the material, the director is collaborative. The marketers and distributors get it, and they're basically proclaiming the same film that is actually there on the screen. It's wonderful, and so I still love being involved with it. But there are times, as Harry has pointed out, where you want to go into a dark room and just cry for a while and not pick up a pen.
Yeah. But it beats working for a living, right?
Yeah, no, it really is. It's a fantastic, the process of writing is fantastic, especially if you use that Schrader methodology, because you're working on yourself. And so whatever anyone else does with the script afterwards, fuck them. You've done what you've done, you've solved your problem, you've gone through your transformation, and you've gotten through to that particular end, and it's very... The process of writing, I think, is wonderful. The process of filmmaking, that's another whole almost other sport.
Speaking of process, we asked Harry about how you start, what sort of actual physical process you use, cards or whiteboards or whatever. What is do you have a set process, or do you change your process depending on the material?
I actually changed a lot, and I was in animation for quite some time, and so I've taken some things from animation. I do like carding at times. I like visuals. I like to see things, and I like to scribble down stuff. So I usually take over large walls and whiteboards and stuff and just start pinning things up. And what I'm trying to do is just immerse myself in the world, really understand the character, the characters, and the whys of what is going on. Why is this happening? Even if it's just the beginning, all I need is that sort of inciting incident. If it's a good inciting incident, then things start to take care of themselves. Some of the indie films that I've written, I don't do any structuring whatsoever. I just start from page one, and
You start on a draft?
yeah,
You don't
sort
do
of
a
that kind of
beat
that
sheet
Annie
or-
Lamott method of, you can drive all the way across the country in pitch dark. As long as your headlights are on, you only need to see 30 feet in front of you to get to the 3,000 miles, right? And I find that to be really exhilarating, that I don't know exactly where it's going to go. So the script that I wrote for Coppola and Wayne Wang, I just knew that there was going to be this inciting incident where this kid, sorry about this, whoever said something about guns and kids, it's not really a family film, this movie, of course, because it's a Coppola movie, but it was a kid in a gang who's a lookout, and he doesn't do his job, which results in the decimation of his gang family. And so it's one night of him trying to get this gun in revenge. And I really didn't know where it was going to go. I just knew that this kid blew it. And I knew the world. I knew it was set in Chinatown, and a Chinatown gang, and I'd been in those kind of gangs before, and I just wanted to see where it went.
And when you reached the end of that, did you look back and say, were you happy with it? I mean, or did you then go back and fiddle with structure?
No, I barely. Once I was done, that one I felt like I was done.
And do you think that it succeeded creatively because you have an innate sense of beginning, middle, and end, or do you think that doesn't even matter?
No, I think in film, for the most part, it matters. I mean, there are those movies like the Gaspar Noé movies that don't really follow those kinds of structures and are really experimental. But I'm not that far to the left. I do like beginning, middles, and ends, and I like stories in general, and I think that's why most of you folks are probably sitting here, is that you're used to telling stories and engaging people on some level, whether it's one-to-one or on a larger level. And that to me is really interesting, is when you can keep someone engaged for some period of time.
Mm. Have you read the screenwriting manuals, the McKees and Sidfield and all of that? Do you think they're useful?
Yeah, I think that we all need something to occupy us when we're trying to avoid writing. And you never know what will just go, oh, wow, yeah. I mean, I remember coming across Save the Cat, and I thought, oh, God, this is really kind of great. You know, and it works for a while, and then it's like, oh, I can't look at that anymore because it's just, it's painting me into, sorry to touch on, it paints the writer into the corner, which is why I use different methods almost for every project that I'm working on. It's whatever is appropriate, and as you say, tool, you don't use a snow shovel to plant tulips, and you don't shovel snow with a little, trowel. So it depends on the picture, and it depends on the movie, the story, and also people change, and who you're writing for. And I don't mean the studio or a producer. I mean the audience. I try not to think about too much about the end result and more about the story as much as possible.
And does that include even when you're writing a family film where the four quadrant thing and all of that? Like, do you have that in mind while you're working?
No, that just clutters up my mind too much and takes me away from the story. The story is about your character's transformation, and if you do it right, then whoever's reading it or seeing the final picture is going to vibrate and resonate off of that. And so if you have a kid and an adult, it doesn't mean like it's a kid movie, like The Piano, right? There's a little girl. That's not a family film, really, right?
No, well, I mean, Stand By Me is often, brought up as an example of some people call it a family film. I don't call it a family film. To me,
what do you call it?
Well, I mean, for me, it's a film for grown-ups about when they were kids. There's a degree of not so much nostalgia, but a looking back and analyzing. And the Richard Dreyfuss character, who's the bookends of the film, really contextualize it as that. But then some other people, in one way, it's a really specious label, family film, because I know, like, I showed my daughter and I watched it when she was quite young.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing in it that's like horrible for her to see. I mean, they're going to look at a dead body, but, you know, and she loved all the stuff of them running down the train tracks and, you know, all of the funny little things that happen. But I think on a thematic level, its themes and its issues are very grown up. But does that make it not a family film? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult enough to write without trying to hit certain marks. The four quadrants thing, I think it's really kind of interesting, but if you force it, it just, you know, it's wrong. And sometimes, as you say, it can be all kids, but that's an adult movie, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have Red Dog, and it's all adults in the movie, and kids love it. Mm-hmm. So you just got to tell the story, all right? Mm-hmm. And whatever feels appropriate. And I think the reason why some of these books and tools and formula are problematical is that it does tend to create some inauthentic moments because you're trying to hit those points that don't necessarily fit the story.
Did you have that experience at all on something like NIMS, where you got notes from the studio or from your producers and they said, look, this is, you know, we need to hit all four quadrants, so can you do this or do that? Was that part of the reason the other writers were brought on?
Yeah, no, there's and I totally get it. It's an expensive movie, and you're trying to get as much box office as possible. They wanted a stronger adult element in there, and so the question was, how do you bring in the Jodie Foster character sooner? That was the main note question. Is we got to get that character in there. Our mom and dad are going to get bored or walk out.
So it was really explicitly about satisfying an adult audience.
No, there was some definite notes having to do with mainly because of the cost of the movie, and that it was really wrapped around this young girl, and she had to carry the film.
Right.
They didn't think that she could do it. I disagree, though. I just think that if you've got a great story, and it doesn't matter who the lead character is, it can be a horse, like in Black Stallion, or it can be, it can be a kid, and it could be a. I still want to do the great geezer adult story of it's somebody who. Because a lot of times there's this feeling of, somebody is way past their prime, and I appreciate those movies where every generation is somewhat honored.
I couldn't agree more. I think the problem nowadays is a movie like Black Stallion would not get made now. For a movie of that size of a budget, you don't have the Mickey Rooney character, you don't have a name actor in the movie till almost halfway through. Yeah. And unfortunately, it isn't producers and it isn't directors and it isn't writers, but distributors are risk averse and they want to cover their asses, and they legitimately, because it's such an expensive thing.
Is Seth still here? Would you make the Black Stallion if you knew it?
But I think that's the thing, people want a certain name. I mean, I'm involved with a project at the moment that Screen Australia has supported, that I was script editor on, and the budget was sitting at about 10 million. And the problem is that at that budget level, the actors that they can get to play the lead aren't big enough. And, they're arguing that sure he's big enough, and they're like, nah, he's not that big. And it's just so frustrating because they have incredibly talented big name actors, but because demographically they've just decided that he's not quite big enough, the director is now having to whittle $1.5 million from the top of the budget. And the irony, of course, is that you're going to sacrifice some of the really great big set pieces that attracted that B-list actor to the project to begin with. So it's a real catch-22.
It is. I don't want to dissuade anyone from pursuing their dream project, though, because it could end up like what Harry said, that it's those scripts that he wrote that they won't make that have gotten him the jobs that he has now. And Nim's Island came because of a movie that I wrote with John Lasseter that has never been made. And to get vetted out by Fox, they read the script and went, oh, okay, he can write a family film. But that film won't get made. But when I read people's scripts, what I look for is passion and commitment. I really hate reading a formula script or a script that I can tell, oh, this guy really thinks they're going to make $1 million off of this thing. You can just feel it, right? It's like, oh, here's a hot story. You know? This is going to be about Justin Bieber and blah. You know, so but what you can really feel come off the page, even if it's badly, it doesn't adhere to script form, for example, or there's a lot of misspellings. And I say this because there's a particular writer. I was a head writer at a company, and this kid kept on handing me scripts, and he literally could not grammatically put a sentence together, and he misspelled so many words. But he was a great storyteller, and I eventually I staffed him. Because he just had this passion and commitment, and you could feel it in the script. When you see the movie, you don't see misspellings, you don't see bad grammar, you connect to story, right? Yeah. So if somebody can really tell a good story, you want to hang on to that person or that script or whatever and go, okay, I can't make that movie right now, but I want you to take that talent and make this movie. Right? So, or write this script. And so if you've got the black stallion in you, don't listen to Joan. Go ahead and write that script. Because if I see that script, I'm going to go, wow, we got to figure out a way to get this thing done. Maybe it should be animated. Maybe it should, maybe we should go back to Carol Ballard or whatever. You know, you just got to figure out how to do these things. And all the time you see these films, or you go, wow, how the heck did that get made? But I'm so glad that movie got made.
Yeah, I mean, I think often it's a case of some one individual at a distributor or a studio or someone with the power to greenlight a film gets it, and they become as passionate as the creator did about it. And those people are sometimes hard to find. I mean, I know we met back in the Middle Ages, also known as the 70s, in LA when...
I was only a child then, and you were exploiting me.
Yeah, it's so true. And I'm still exploiting you. And but back then it was, the 70s when people who ran studios were filmmakers, but it was just starting to change. And we were talking about this earlier with someone that, a film like Taxi Driver or Midnight Cowboy, they were big studio films then. They would not necessarily get made today. They'd be considered very, very art house niche.
Or, here's the thing. We're in the golden age. I know this is, film Australia, Screen Australia. We're in the golden age of television. The great thing about television now is that it doesn't adhere to the formulas. You want to kill off the main character, kill him off. So you look at something like Mr. Robot. That started off as a screenplay. That guy wanted to make a movie. His agent said, it's right in between. It's too long to be a movie, and it's too short to be a series, but it should be a series. Just expand it out. If you've got talent and you've got a great story, I just may be like a Pollyanna about this, but I believe that it's going to find its way to eyeballs. And if it doesn't, then it's probably... I gotta say, it's probably not that good.
Right. Well, the good thing is it's called Screen Australia, not Theatrical Cinema Australia. So it can be, your iPhone screen.
But have you heard that story about Mr. Robot? it was supposed to be a movie. Have you guys seen that? Has it come here?
Yeah.
It's a pretty amazing piece of work, and it's hard to believe that it made it to USA Network and has won all sorts of awards and was incredibly popular.
Absolutely. We're going to go to some questions shortly, but I have so many more questions, but one thing I definitely want to ask you, which you suggested I ask you, and I have no idea what your answer is. What is the I Ching of movies?
Did anyone ever hear throw the I Ching? There's one that keeps on coming up for me, and it always says the same two words, and it's like, perseverance furthers. And there have been some filmmakers that I went to school with, or that early on in my career I worked with, who were so much more talented than I was. They're not making movies anymore because it is a rough sport. There's very few smooth journeys in the making of a movie. Red Dog took a long time to make. It was worth it, and now, here they are going into the sequel. But it took some perseverance. And that guy who wrote the script, he had spent 5 years and he still said, no, I won't take the $30 million because I have a certain vision for it. So if you have a vision for it and you, sometimes you don't even have to be that good. If you're stubborn, you possibly can get the movie made and have success. And I find that really fascinating that some of the most the people that I know who end up doing well in the film business are usually pretty stubborn about either their vision or getting the things done and so forth, and sometimes it doesn't have a lot to do with talent. The movie that I have coming out in April is based on a novel called Soul, which is a National Book Award finalist. That was a pretty big YA novel, young adult novel in the United States. And I had written another anti-trafficking, sex trafficking script that was set in the early 1900s about Chinese girls coming to the United States and being trafficked. And I just kept on butting my head up against the wall on that particular script. And I read this novel and I went, oh my gosh, this is so powerful and beautiful and important. Let's option this book and let's adapt it and make it into a movie. And wrote the script and showed it to different distributors and producers and so forth.
This, by the way, is not a family film, right?
Well, see, that's the thing. It's a YA novel. And I know 10, 11, 12-year-old girls who have read this book and are just so stridently opposed now to exploitation of girls and women and work hard for it. But it couldn't get the film made because there's certain aspects of graphic sex that even though it wasn't going to be shown in the film, that in fact that there's sort of these dream sequences that come out of those moments, it still gave people the willies. But maybe it's the most important kind of family film to talk about. It's like how we treat our children, right? It took about 5-6 years to get that movie made. Didn't have anything really to do with the script at the end of the day or the book or anything. It had to do with a bankable person, Emma Thompson, saying, we got to make this movie, and convincing financiers to put the movie, to finance the movie. So
is that why there are 15 producers credited on IMDb?
It's because anyone who put in more than 50 cents into the movie got a credit.
Great.
Which is fine by me.
Have you seen the film?
I have seen the film.
And what do you think?
It's not the movie that I wrote. And, talk about, even in the indie film, I only should say even in. So I would say this movie was probably made for $5 million or less. And, but the producer, even though I'm credited as a producer, the actual producer and director felt like, we've got to put some recognizable faces into this movie. The script that I wrote was just about this Nepalese girl getting trafficked into a brothel in Calcutta. They put these folk into it, these white savior kind of folk, which to me kind of ruins what I was trying to do in the movie, which was to have the girl affect her own freedom and the freedom of the other girls that she was trafficked with. You kind of dilute that when you have rescue workers who are...
And it's Gillian Anderson, isn't it? Is she one of them? Yeah.
But I don't really know what was necessary to get the film made. So if that was necessary to get the film made, then so be it, and it's made, and it's engendered a conversation around trafficking that's important.
Right. Okay, we just have a few minutes left for questions. Does anyone have questions for Joe? Do we have some microphones? Thank you. Thanks, Cleo. Oh, okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello? Yeah. You said you once wrote a film in 10 days, which is amazing. Typically, how long would you take to write a screenplay, like a first draft?
It varies depending on how complicated it is. On a studio picture, if you're a novice, if it's your first time, it kind of makes no sense. They give you 10 weeks to turn in your first draft. And then if you're a big-time writer, you can take all year long. So it's like, hey, what? So my actual writing time, the lengthiest part of time, if I am outlining, is in that conception period, structuring it out, because movies are really, it's kind of a structural exercise. And if you do it right, still I can write a screenplay pretty quickly if my outline is really tight, and it kind of just writes itself, and you're just, well, I nowadays on some of the things that I work on, I write down how many pages I want on each thing. I try, as I'm writing, if I say a page and a half, I'm trying not to go to 2 pages, right? I know that sounds kind of, but the rigor and the discipline of putting yourself through that sometimes makes for better writing. I don't say it always does. I mean, the other things, like when I write an indie, and I'll spend, like this one that I'm working on right now, I've been thinking about it for 2 years now, and I still haven't actually started to write the words down on it, and I'm not structuring it out. I just keep on trying to see it in my head.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Hi.
Hi.
When it comes to getting into a child's perspective, a child's point of view, be they your protagonist or other characters, are there things that you've found that have worked, or techniques that you might consciously go to when you're either outlining or even writing pages?
Yeah. As my children say to me, and they're now in their 20s, Dad, you're basically a 13-year-old boy. So I don't really have to try that hard to put myself into the kids' roles. It's harder for me to get adult. But I think you're absolutely right. Is that you try and really fit yourself into each one of those characters and see the story from that point of view. If you don't do that, not only does the dialogue seem the same, but you're only serving the one character, right? Mm. And that's why I forget who was it, Steve, who said that you really want a good villain, right? And the great villain doesn't really think of themselves as a bad person at all.
Right.
And they're really, the really good ones are very complex and really interesting, and they're trying to do, they're mission oriented, and they're just, they're willing to do anything to get to that end. And so that's why you got to be careful about those tools when you're writing those kids' roles, that if you're using tools that kind of feel formulaic, no kid thinks in sensible terms. They're really spontaneous. So to try and be as spontaneous as possible, I think, when you're working with a kid's character is really key.
And I think one of the things that can help you do that, I know Matt Weiner, the guy who created Mad Men, he talks about this, a lot of writers do, is that when you're writing a character and you're writing their dialogue, to always, at a certain point, hopefully really early on, say it out loud, act it out, because when you act that character, it automatically puts you into their perspective. Even if you don't pull it off, even if you're not very convincing, you'll start to be the person, not just make them talk like they're a ventriloquist dummy. And that's what you want to avoid. You want to avoid imagining what they'll say and just say it, just fucking say it, whatever stupid thing comes out. And, you know, because you can always go back and rewrite. Microphones. Oh, here we go. Yep.
Hi, I really like what you said about your metaphor and the therapy aspect to getting to the end of the script. And I was just curious as to whether you tell the same story emotionally again and again, or whether it works.
Yeah, good question.
No, I basically, there are certain go-to problems that I have that I don't know if I'll ever solve. But you find different skin as metaphor to deal with it. And as I pointed out early on in the forum, is that I think a lot of movies are about this unempowered or the powerless rising to power and overcoming. That's just the general arc, right? But it's the how and it's the why. And the how and the why changes all the time, right? But even though you're on that particular path. So some people will probably look at my work and go, oh God, he's beating that same drum a lot. But I feel like the why and the how is kind of different. And, you know, a traffic girl from Nepal is very different than a girl same age growing up on a tropical island, you know, talking to animals. But they're both trying to, both of them are in a coming of age journey.
Yeah.
With your enormous amount of experience over many years, thinking back about 30 years ago, would you say that there are more people writing screenplays today than 30 years ago when it was tick, 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 ting, tick, 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 ting? Whereas today we've got mobile phones and computers, and to me, I seem to see an influx of scripts that just seem to pour in from everywhere.
You know, I don't think there's any more or less from what I can tell. When I first would go into this studio, my first studio script, I remember going into the producer's office and there was just shelves of screenplays and the floors are stacked with it. Now, of course, it's all digital, you don't see it. As I say, the difficulty is the finish, right? And there's always going to be a certain amount that are finished, and then there's a certain amount that are really good and noticeably good, and that's small. That's really, it's kind of staggering that you can just read through scripts and just, you know, it's kind of surprising.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Here we go, in the front.
And just to finish that off, don't worry about what anyone else is doing. You can't even think in those terms. Just, I mean, if a zillion people more are doing it now than 30 years ago, doesn't matter. Just, you know, you only have your story, and nobody else has that story. So just trust that, and really, you know, I think Seth has pointed that out, is that you guys in Australia have a whole set of stories that we in the other side of the universe have not heard yet. The rest of the world hasn't heard yet. And even if it only plays here, that's fine.
Hi, I read in your bio, and we haven't really touched on it, that you're also a game designer.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, we've talked a little bit about merchandising as far as plush toys and action figures and all that kind of stuff goes, but another big thing that they do now is bringing out games in line with movies. I was just wondering if you've been involved in any crossover between films and their games, and if you can talk a little bit about where that sits in the marketplace as far as films go.
Interestingly, none of the movies that I've worked on, or nobody has asked me to take a movie and turn it into a game. I've been asked to try and wrap my brain around and try and pitch to an existing game and how would it work as a movie, and extend those sorts of brands. The gamification that I used to do entertainment gaming a lot more and massively multiplayer type stuff, and I think it's amazing. It's really interesting, and the budgets in that world are kind of staggering, mostly because of the kind of revenue that they can generate if you've got a great game. I'm interested in gamification these days that are not very entertaining. They're more about behavioral change, because I think people respond in different ways to game-type mechanics.
Well, that's...
I know that doesn't make any sense, but, but maybe but for education,
Yeah, sure.
and right now I'm really interested in people coming out of prison and how to use gamification to help
Joe
them.
is about to change the world.
No, I wouldn't say that.
He's about to prevent all prisoners from going back to jail.
People's behavior, whether from a movie or from a game, is affected. If you don't think that you can affect your audience, then you should be in a different field. It's very affecting, the stuff that we do. So after having done kind of straight media for a long time, I want to see if I can affect behavior in other circumstances a little more directly.
Out of interest, I've been talking with a guy who is creating, using gaming technology, is creating for people who have,
For people who are like got locked-in syndrome, so the only thing that they can move is their eyes.
Yeah.
And there's new gaming technology which is $200 to buy to use as a gamer, and $10,000 to buy if you have locked-in syndrome and want to communicate with the world.
Yeah.
So he's taking the gaming world technology and using it for good rather than evil, for want of a better word, and then looking back at creating stories and movies, because it's mainly aimed at children, because they want to introduce it to children so they can live a normal life, creating movies and stories for the kids to have a story that goes along with that, what is essentially virtual reality technology. So I think it's all starting to kind of wrap itself around each other as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think the VR and Oculus Rift stuff is really going to affect all of us and what kind of stories we tell and how we tell them. So, film has been around for 100+ years, and now this interactive gaming is going to allow you to be more engaged with the audience, and I think it's really exciting for what's going to be on the horizon here.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you all.
I want to thank Joe very much.